me know, yeah. There we
It is
go.
recording. And Jenny, your screen sharing is working okay, it looks like.
Okay, wonderful. And I just remember to advance my slides. So as I had said previously, I am just working from a PowerPoint version here, as one or two of the graphics didn't quite translate over, but I welcome you to follow along in the Google Slides version, if that's helpful for you. Just need my notes. Mhm. All right. So welcome everyone to the session today entitled Mapping the Ephemeral, Visualizing the Hidden Care Work of Knowledge Making. Um, I would welcome you to introduce yourself in the chat if you feel comfortable, and we can just get to know each other a little bit. But again, no pressure to do so. I know that everyone is accessing the session at different times in different ways. You may be working on other projects or able to dedicate time, and I recognize that. So contributions today to the session can look like just being here in the space, camera on, camera off, sharing in the chat, unmuting to share. We're going to do some forms of kind of like crafting and making, and you are welcome to engage in that, to share about that, or even to just think about the process or reflect on how the process was for you. There's no pressure to um, share your experience. Um, I have set most of my slides to have a kind of an off-white background. I know I find that helpful for visual load. Sometimes the bright white can be a lot, and have tried to not overload with visuals. When I have had visuals, alt text is in place, and I will describe any relevant visuals that show up throughout. And captioning is available through Zoom if you would like to turn that on. I will say I've did not have a voice yesterday. I've had a bit of a cold and a touch of laryngitis, so my voice isn't at its strongest. But let me know if there's anything I can do to speak more clearly or in a way that works for you. And you can let me know that, or my colleagues Danny and Yasser. So, when you read the title of today's session, I don't know if any of the terminology had a different meaning to you. I come from a background in art history, in museum studies, in education, in English, and some of these terms have come up for me in different ways than they are defined in different disciplines. So I wanted to take a second to offer some context and explain what I mean in the context of today's session and in my work, what I mean by some of the terms. So when I'm talking about material practice and meaning making, um, engaging with material, whether that is digital or physical material, and using these as prompts and ways to engage with interrogating our values, our approaches, thinking about the way that knowledge is shared. And it's an opportunity to engage in a relational way that is embodied. The ephemeral. This was a term that I encountered first when I was taking my art history undergraduate degree, and we learned about ephemeral art and the beauty of things because they don't last. So fireworks was an example, pyrotechnics. So when a firework would go off, part of the beauty of it is that it doesn't stay. And that you get to enjoy that experience and you have that memory, but you don't have something to hold on to. And that's something that's kind of stuck with me. Uh, the term like the transience of life or the transience of beauty, how some things are so beautiful because they don't last. And it's something that's come up again for me and thinking about um, that in the context of knowledge sharing and of information and the ways that we communicate with each other, particularly in our increasingly digital world. What happens to a text message as it moves up or away into your phone and you don't revisit it? Um, Even what happens to a sticky note that you write and then stick somewhere and forget about. I think that there's beauty in those simple moments. And they're often overlooked and they often hold a different kind of value that isn't always necessarily valued in our neoliberal structures. Artifact. So this kind of tying together with the material, these are those pieces, those uh, whether digital or physical, and they kind of serve in this sense as evidence of something that was created or evidence that these ephemeral moments took place. So usually at this point, I would have learning outcomes, and um, my first instinct was to write learning outcomes, and then I took a moment to step back and say, what are our collective goals for this session? And so two things that I would like to do are to create and to surface, create a space where we can remember together, um, a space where we can create maps, collections where we can create reflections, and a place where we can surface these meaningful moments and the often invisible or forgotten care work that goes into producing knowledge or output, whether that's in the academy or in our daily lives, whatever makes most sense for you. A quick introduction to me. My name is Jennifer Foley. I am an educational developer living and working near London, Ontario in Canada. I work at Western University. Um, as an educational developer, I work in an interesting third space kind of on campus where I am a staff member, but I work closely with faculty and graduate students. I support, I connect, and previous to this, I was an academic librarian, so I did similar work and a lot to do with resource sharing, and I've kind of carried that ethos into my educational development work and have had the opportunity to work with some amazing colleagues who've helped me better articulate how I approach my work and give name to what I do and what I'm passionate about. So I do love to explore information and knowledge sharing, particularly thinking about things like craft pedagogy and method and how this can unearth identity through reflective practice. I am also a mother to two beautiful sons. I am a wife, I am a sister, and I am a daughter. And these are all very important relationships to me too, and parts of my identity. So, something that comes up as a theme consistently in a lot of the work they do, and something that also connects to kind of who I am, is process and product and not having them process versus product where one is worth more than the other and in different contexts they offer different meaning, but this kind of links to the who I am because if you were to look me up online I don't have many publications with my name. I don't have my name next to grants. I am not a teaching fellow. My name doesn't appear a lot in the scholarly literature. I do appear in at least two acknowledgement statements, though, as somebody who helped support someone's research. I'm kind of hidden a little bit. Maybe you'll find a PDF of a conference session that I did because a lot of the work that I do is related to information sharing, resource sharing, um, translating knowledge. And as I've continued in the academic space, have kind of had to hold these two things together where I don't always feel that I want my name on big publications, but there is that product piece that is important in the academy, the publisher parish, having a resume. A lot of the work I do has to do with like teaching dossiers and keeping all of your artifacts together and presenting yourself. Um, so what I often think about here is the side that ends up on Instagram, that ends up on the internet, that ends up on the resume, and is often the polished output. And this is an image from a friend of mine who does amazing cross stitches and shares them. So there's a little crafty piece in there. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of a product that you've produced and celebrating that. But I like to look at kind of the messy underside. I texted her and asked for the back of that cross stitch. What did it look like? And you can see the threads are hanging out. You can see knots, and you can see work that went on there to solve problems. I wonder, did she watch a YouTube tutorial to figure out how to fix the stitch here? Did she talk to somebody and get their idea about what design they would like? Did she compare colors and find inspiration in nature as she walked around? I'm so interested in that story um, behind the session, behind the product. So I'm going to take a moment now and ask that you start to think about a project or a product and output, something that you created recently or something that's of particular interest to you, a goal you reached. And whether you want to share in the chat or not, that's okay. Even if you just write it down on a sticky note or you make a note to yourself or you keep that memory with yourself, I want you to think about that product for a few moments. I'm going to give you just another minute to think about that. And if nothing comes to mind, that's okay. We have time together today. We don't expect output. You can just keep keep the question in your mind. So what I'll ask next is what ideas, exchanges, and interactions happened in the process of developing this final product? So this may take some kind of thinking backwards, some recalling. Were these as celebrated as the final product? And just think generally right now, are there any traces of these interactions? And Danny has shared in the chat, I do studio cycling and have been doing it for the past almost 3 years. That's big. Today I'll reach my 200th class. There's a little celebration. So we will celebrate today. That is that's big. Cycling is not my forte. Vasant, thank you for sharing that. TEFL is my course. It was my goal to start this course. I didn't achieve the final project, which is the certificate yet. That yet. But yeah, if you think about the learning that has already happened, even though you don't have that paper certificate in your hand, you can think of small achievements along the way. So this next slide here, very text heavy, but it's kind of me thinking out loud and me sharing some of the ways you can go about collecting these uncelebrated moments. And this list is not exhaustive, but I'm going to read them all aloud. And I want you to kind of think about, do you relate to any of these? And as some of these are suggestions so that you can collect kind of like a screenshot or a photo or excerpt of these findings. So the first, a list of all the books people recommended to you. Who made the recommendation and why? Copy and paste quotes from past email conversations into a Word document. Gather the sticky notes from your desk. Listen to old voice memos and voicemails. Look at your bookmarks folder and old Teams chat messages for links people shared. I don't know, I'm a bit of a link hoarder and a link sharer. So sometimes these, with best intentions, are put in file folders in my bookmarks tab and not always revisited. Revisit your AI chatbot history to unearth forgotten conversations and questions. Close your eyes and think back to a time during the creation of this product where you interacted with someone. Record that memory in writing or audio. Organize saved PDFs shared by colleagues into labeled desktop folders. Find a draft version of a published piece. Look for comments and suggestions left by the editors. Are there any forms of resurfacing and gathering that either you can think of, would like to explore, or that you have used previously? I'd encourage you to share in the chat or to unmute and share aloud.
Um, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know why I stopped doing this, but I used to like whenever somebody would start giving me recommendations of like a TV show, I would um like have like a new page in my notebook where I'd be like, you know, Sarah recommends, and then just like list down all the things. And it was a good way to like keep track of uh like suddenly if I noticed like that several different people were recommending the same thing to me, I was like, I really
Mhm.
need to watch that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you were like creating a material trace of these recurring, yeah, like small moments that happened with people sharing a resource. Yeah. And so that could be in a notebook, like you shared. Sometimes I use my notes app. Well, not sometimes, all the time I use my notes app. And I have to offer context for myself to remember how that note got there and what I meant. Heather is sharing a recently completed project was a virtual exchange between one of their classes and a class in Japan. The final product, a bulletin board display in the building entrance. Thank you for sharing that. And I like seeing these outputs too that aren't always just an academic article. Like you can be in education, you can be in academia, and not everything you put out is a formal academic article. There's so much more. So I'll encourage you to keep thinking about this, and we're going to have an activity where there's some time where I would encourage you to take time to either, if that's jotting down, collecting, sketching out some of these hidden contributions to your product or project. So the micro artifacts, those starting to save those emails or take excerpts from the emails, bring your voice notes together, going back through instant messages. And some of it is the human connections between those. Um, the peer who read your rough draft. You can think about these people who were engaged, the family member who held space while you talked about how you were stuck in this research problem and sat with you while you figured it out. And the relational moments of even just a walk that helped you clear a mental block. So we'll take some time now. I have 25 minutes set aside. If we're finding that that is too much or too little, we can adjust. But I welcome you to get involved with this. And I'm going to turn my camera off for the time so that I'm not looking here watching, but I will be here. I'm going to do the activity as well. And I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have questions or you have something you want to share there, I welcome you to do so. Does anyone have any questions before we kind of go out? I know I've done a lot of talking to get things started. No? Okay. So my camera will be off, but I will be here. Thank you, Denny, for sharing. Or by unmuting and sharing. Um, but what I wanted to do following this activity was taking a moment or two to share your experiences, whether that was what you found along the way or what your experience was, retracing these steps and going through the process. If I can share from the chat, Danny had noted going through pictures to map a journey from the past. 3 is very trippy. There are so many forgotten moments. So it can feel odd to kind of look back through photos, especially ones where you thought I'll never forget this moment, and then you revisit a moment and think, how long ago was that? Or I had forgotten this. And I had just reiterated too that, like, remember, there's no right or wrong material choices. Um, it's more just like working through the process, and it's an invitation to notice. Hassan had shared for the project attending the TEFLism course. So some micro artifacts found along the way were handwritten course notes. So personal notes, highlights during the training session, some feedback from the coordinator about the learning experience, financial commitments, yeah, payment slips for the course fees, like it's a tangible record of the financial investment in professional development. And it's cool to see what kind of emerges at like the periphery of the experience, things that you don't always think about, or having the material version of that can help you engage. The human connections. Dahlia, your sister, lent the first installment of the course to ensure that you didn't miss the deadline due to financial constraints. I remember that happening with we have OSAP here. And sometimes when it would come in was after the deadline for when you're supposed to have course fees due, and it can have tension. So just that human moment of sharing and support is big. From friends pushing for encouragement to enroll, from the instructor guiding the core learning, and from one of the trainers offering expert insights and professional support. And some relational moments, personal me time, weekly quiet sessions with a cup of coffee and dark chocolate to recharge, reset, and successfully complete my course assignments after exhausting work weeks. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was really lovely to see. Is there anybody else who would like to share again? Like, it doesn't have to be what your outputs were, but just your experience.
I'll go. If,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so the the goal, the like outcome thing was a workshop that I delivered last Friday at
Uh,
an event. Um, and the workshop actually went kind of it was kind of a flop.
okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but like there was like really low attendance and it like just didn't work very well with didn't like I was expecting to have like a lot more people there and it yeah just but it was useful to think about like kind of what had gone into it even though it hadn't felt like it was successful and I think I was really influenced by a session that I'd been to at a convention a year
Mhm.
or two ago where it was just people just having conversations about like an author that it was like just like fans meeting up talking about Terry Pratchett.
Yeah.
And it was just lovely and like I came away from it feeling so like there are all these books that I want to read and I like really felt connected and I wanted to recreate that um, and get people talking about the kinds of like science fiction and fantasy works that like inspire them and like that feed into their activism. But I got the sense that yeah, like actually, if I'd given it more structure, maybe it would have worked better. So it's yeah, thinking about like the all the different like conversations I'd had with people and because like I think in advance of the session I've been like I just want it to be really chill and really like low stress for me. And I
Mm.
realized through doing the session that actually like um the um that maybe like trying to give stuff more structure, it like even if stuff feels like it's a chill event, that actually like there may be more work behind the scenes that I've not appreciated. Um,
Yeah.
Going
And
into like yeah, yeah,
yeah, kind of like the care work there too, sometimes where, yeah, a space is so flexible and so open and so welcoming because care has been, yeah, there's been upfront work to create that space. And I think it's beautiful to think about. Yeah, maybe the session didn't work out the way you wanted, but when you don't just think about the product as a failure to discard, you think about all of that went into it and yeah, small changes that you could make or how this can be just one more of those traces within it. You can start to build towards another product, another chance. And when you have the material pieces along the way and think about it, sometimes it can help you identify maybe what was missing or what could be adjusted or what factors were things that you couldn't control. I know sometimes I've run the best workshop and it was a Friday afternoon and just nobody wanted to be there and so it didn't land as well, right? Or people weren't in the space. Um, so thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. Did anyone else want to share?
I could share briefly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I just finished a virtual exchange project with a class of students in Japan. And so I was just spent the time going through emails between myself and the partner teacher in Japan, and was really struck by, the positive comments that we made to each other and just being very positive with each other on but also the difficulty in meeting.
Mhm.
Sometimes one of us would would not be able to meet at the time that we had originally arranged because of family or work or other constraints. So also these challenges with organizing and running a virtual exchange were also part of that. And it's really nice, a really nice exercise because we're focusing now on, well, why do we even do this? It's a lot of extra work. I mean, we wanted to, but
Yeah.
what motivated us to start this project and to complete it? And so that this is a nice part of the motivation is the relatedness, right?
That's yeah, and looking through those, you can see, yeah, there was a logistical component, and that is your time, and that is care in being flexible, and not just sticking to rigid structures. We can't meet because of this time, therefore we won't meet. And yeah, so this process can be helpful, I think, in even when you have to reflect on the full process or you have to write a report about something for a formal structure, it can help you to do that work. I know with my, we call it a PDG, but like your um, like annual report or your reporting structure for your job. I found it helpful to trial doing this exercise as a way to go back through my past year. And there were so many things that I forgot I had done. It's only been a year since I did it last, but it's amazing the amount of interactions, logistical work, resource sharing that goes into your job and kind of making that explicit can be helpful both for you as the process and helpful for articulating that to the powers that be. Yes, sir. Thank you. Did you want to share? Hand up. Thank you. I kind of worked through the activity a little bit in thinking about today's session even. So it was kind of related to MYFest, like a screenshot even of the message I'd sent over the break in our chat. The chat will probably go away or it'll be automatically saved in Zoom after and probably get lost on my computer. um, a screenshot of one of the slides with my notes underneath, something that isn't shown to everybody, but that took work and that helped me to articulate. And also a quote from a notes app where I jotted down an early idea for a session to chat with Danny about when we had initially talked about me joining MyFest. So those were a couple of my material traces for today's product. Are there any more in the chat here, or did I miss anybody? Yes, or sorry, did you have your hand still up, or is that an additional add? No, Danny.
I'm just my project, my milestone was reaching my 200th class.
Yeah.
And when I started looking through pictures, I was looking for cycling pictures because all my cycling moments are with my sister. So we both do studio cycling and like cycling out in the real world together. But then I got distracted by a different project, and it was a tattoo that I was working with a tattoo artist to design for me. So I went to Instagram to go find pictures of the tattoo in the conversation. But then on Instagram, the cycle instructor for my 200th class tonight had messaged me, and she's like, "What music do you want for your milestone?" So it was like this weird back and forth journey for me. So I'm not going to map out the whole thing, but it was just strange that I never thought to go to Instagram for the first thing, got distracted, went there for something else. And then it was just like such a nice thing. She's like, "What music do you want?" And I asked her for angry girl music. So we're gonna we're gonna see what that turns out. But yeah, so
Like Olivia
honestly, Jenny, I
Rodrigo.
really enjoyed the process of this.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, it doesn't always look like I don't know, I'm not really a linear thinker, so I can very much relate to that. Like as you're going through the process of looking for materials, maybe you find something else or it brings up a different project. And I find too there's a lot of connections between the different work I'm doing because there's themes that are interesting to me or like that theme of process and product, even in today, I revisited slides from a conference presentation I'd done that was more like focused on craft and dossiers, but there was overlap, so it counted in both spots. And so it's interesting to think if you have your one map for this, and then another map exists, and those have connections, and on and on and on forever. Thank you. Right, so I had built in 10 minutes for a break here. Wondering if that's still something we wanted to do. I don't know if during your 25 minutes you had gotten up and had a bit of a break, or if you hyper focused and just spent the full time doing that. So, if you want, just let me know general consensus. Yeah, okay. We'll do a 10-minute break. Yeah, get up and walk around, make yourself a tea, and we will come back here for it doesn't matter to you guys what time it is to me. I was gonna say for 11:20, but yeah, let's take a 10-minute break and come back here where we talk a bit more about mapping. So I want to briefly kind of reframe what I mean by mapping in this context. So when we hear the word map, oftentimes we think of something objective, like a geographic map, for example, that simply represents maybe a landscape, or it provides directions, and um, this serves a purpose. But even geographic maps are interpretive. So every map involves choices in how it's designed, what is emphasized, what's left out, how the information is organized. And so just as with all information, maps are never neutral. And they can reflect the perspectives and understanding of the world, both our internal and external worlds. So it's something that I find very interesting, even though I don't come from a background in geography or GIS. The idea of mapping is very interesting to me. And scholars such as like Dennis Woods have argued that maps are simply mirrors of reality, are not simply mirrors of reality, but arguments about reality. And thank you, Yasser, for joining us for the time you could. So in this workshop, we're going to approach mapping more as like an interpretive practice rather than an objective one. And we're going to think more about kind of creative mapping to detail what went into this project that we've been discussing. And it's going to be the process of making it is going to highlight these relationships and moments and materials and that form of care as an activity in sense making, and also of kind of information encoding. So you're translating your experiences and translating these materials that you've found, and you get the creative choice to choose what colors you have, what lines represent, what symbols you create. And I will say that your map doesn't have to make sense to everyone who sees it. If you choose to have it as a form of conveying information, you can, but it doesn't have to make sense to anybody but you. And it doesn't even have to make sense to you when you revisit it in 6 months and think, what was I thinking when I made that? It can just be, it can be the process. So there's no right way to map. It's more about thinking about relationships. So I like to kind of open up the idea of mapping and create a space where everybody can engage with it in a way that's meaningful to them. So this is not an exhaustive list, but there's some ways I've encountered creative mapping in my research. Apologies, sorry, my cough there. But I wanted to bring in multimodal ways of mapping and more inclusive ways of mapping. Maybe you don't feel comfortable with drawing, or maybe bringing together a visual collage is not something that you are comfortable doing or able to do, or something that makes meaning for you. Perhaps it's a sound collage. Perhaps all of your map is different sound bites and songs. I'm not limiting you to what your map is going to look like. I'm going to read through this slide just to kind of surface some of these different ways and approaches to creative mapping. So I've written, you could annotate the final text of, say, an article by adding the sticky notes that you found, or writing quotations in from the emails that went into this final article. Audio, you could record an interview, or record a reenactment of a conversation that you had. Create a sound collage. You could do this by maybe collecting sounds you heard throughout the process, the voice notes you took to remind yourself, music clips that inspired you. Tactile, you could build with Lego. I love these ones. You could use yarn to connect. I know it may look like one of those conspiracy theory maps up on the wall with the different photographs and red string connecting them, but I think those look very cool. You could sew, you could knit, you could quilt. You could engage with this as a quilted map, or something that brings together the materials from your time together with someone. Movement, you could walk the spaces that you walked when you came up with this idea and record your thoughts. You could create a video recording. Your map could be visual in that way. You can move objects that you found around on your desk and rearrange them. And then in the digital space, we have tools like mind mapping programs, kind of like Miro or Zoom Whiteboard. You could use programs like Canva or Google Slides to make a visual collage. Organize your artifacts into desktop folders, or use programs. There's like a program called Obsidian, or lots of different programs where they kind of organize the digital notes that you've taken into a visual graph. So I was hesitant to put this slide in because it is, excuse me, it leans heavily into the visual creative mapping, and also because it is a series of images, it is not the most accessible slide for everyone. So what I'm going to do is describe the images that are on the screen, but they are meant not to pose as an example that I want you to work towards, or an ideal map. They are included because, in my personal experience of exploring creative mapping, these are the types of maps visually that tended to draw my eye, or tended to inspire me, and made me think I want to create something like that. And not all of these are even were intended to be visual maps. Some of these are, one is from an architectural portfolio, another talks about like coding and journaling. And so I have a Pinterest board that is called Unbound Session, and I have been saving all of these different data visualizations, portfolios, sketches that people have shared, and not all of them were meant to be exactly mapping or the type of work that we are doing, but they caught my eye and they inspired me. So I would encourage you to look for inspiration around you. So one moment here. There are 3 images shown on the screen. The first is an assortment of photographs. There is green text. There is a image of a light pink, it appears to be a letter or a document. And all of these different pieces are overlaid and connected in a way that is Organized, I don't understand how, but they are make connections for the person who created it, and primarily using the colors green and pink, and different textures are involved. And I think it shows mapping in a very creative way. The second image similarly pairs photography with written notes and colorful arrows to show connections that were meaningful to the creator. And the third image is a very colorful 2 pages of a notebook that appears to be blocks of written text that are highlighted in different colors, written in different colored pen, and there's different paper textures to these images. Okay, so for the next portion, it's going to be some time to actually engage in the making. So we have about a half hour. I'd initially said 40 minutes, but I think we're going to take a little bit less time to do that. And then so we have time to maybe come back and share. And we are a bit of a smaller group. So the share back may not be within breakout rooms as originally intended, but we can just kind of flex with that and do what works for us. So I will give you the option then we'll do the breakout rooms as this. If you would like to go into a breakout room and map independently and silently, you may do so. If you would like to go into another breakout room or stay in the main room and create your map, you are welcome to do so. And then what I'm going to do is in the main room, I'm going to talk through my process of creating a map. So if you don't feel like making today and you just kind of want to hear about my experience, you are welcome to do that instead. Let's see here.
So Jenny, I'm just going to confirm you want 2 breakout rooms, but folks can choose their own.
Yeah, I would
So
want
the
to
first one's called Silent Reflection, and the second one is, I just called it the chatting room.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you want to stay in the main room and hear my process, then you don't have to choose a breakout room.
Okay.
And I'm going to say, let's do 15 minutes. I know that's less than we had originally intended, but I think it will give you a chance to at least get started. And then maybe we can spend some of the rest of our time talking about our process. So the activity slide that I have up says map your project. Start with a blank page, or maybe you've already started in our last activity. You're welcome to even use Google Slides and make a slide. You can try writing the title of your project or the product that you put out. A few descriptive words or an image is kind of your center, and then begin to organize these artifacts you found, these connections around. I have some prompt questions here if it's helpful for you, if you're in the group who just wants to reflect or you want some conversation to think about. But a lot of it is kind of revisiting that, like, what are these pieces that went into the product? What's missing? What feels central? What am I still working on? Does anybody have any questions before we take the 15 minutes to start
Jenny,
mapping? Yeah,
I had one question. Would you like
yeah.
me to do the breakout rooms or Danny?
I think Danny has it set up, whichever one is easier. Yeah.
Yeah, Noreen, I already have them set. I have it ready just to click
Okay,
open
that's
when Jenny's
amazing.
ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you ready for me to click open, Jenny?
I am ready when you are.
Okay, start it. Okay.
Wonderful. So those of you who've chosen to stay, we have the opportunity to see a little mini map that I made. And as I had said before, the ones that I shared in my previous slide are different parts of the process and have been created by different people and are encoded with different meaning. My one for today was just one example of something I produced for this session. So at the center, you'll see there is a screenshot of an online, an academic blog article that was published by my colleague Danny and I, and another colleague of ours, Mandy Penny. And it was such a wonderful experience, and there was a lot of meaning making and identity development and relationality that went into the process. And so if you were to read this article, you'd get at some of that because it's what we talk about. But for the most part, that was the product. That was what was published, and that is what people would see, and that's what my name would be next to. I chose to, underneath that, add a graphic of roots. Yeah, this image shows tree roots, but kind of what we talked about in the article was how in the academy, often formal output or the fruiting body of the mushroom is what is rewarded. And then underneath, all of the relational care work that goes on it is not seen, but it is an important part of the fungi. So it's called the mycelium. Below, it's their root structure. So in my mycelium, or my roots underneath the soil, I have a screenshot from a text message that was shared with photographs of the mushrooms we were cultivating, and a little update about them, and some conversation around it. And this is just one piece of a text chain where we shared resources, we chatted, we shared photos. Beside that, I have a small image of just a humorous sticker that I had made to do with talking a little bit about how networking is often seen kind of like a disingenuous and networking event where I'm trying to make connections so that I can make more sales. And I had done a play on that to do with mycelial networking, and talking about like information exchange and optimizing your resource flow. And I've included this because I created this and just for fun, and had shared it with a couple of colleagues, and Danny and Mandy were one of them. And it's one of the things that got us talking about mushrooms and talking about the root structures, and it was something that kind of spurred our research on. You wouldn't really see this humorous graphic shared in an academic publication, but it was one of the things that spurred us to come together and produce this formal output. And then the third photograph is my hand holding the book, Let's Become Fungal. And you can see up in the corner maybe that there is a barcode. I've chucked it out from the library. And I sent this image to Mandy and Danny because I had found this book. It looked interesting. It looked like it aligned with what we were talking about. And I was excited to read it, to talk to them about it, to share with them that it existed, and because I love libraries, to share that maybe when I'm finished with it, you'll want to read it. And Mandy ended up buying a copy. So that was another little example of something that happened underneath that you don't see in the final publication. So this was one of my creative maps to do with the project. The second one is, so let's see. Okay, so the image on the screen is kind of like an abstract visual. There's three main nodes from which bright green tendrils kind of branch out and interconnect. This is overlaid on top of an 11 by 11 semi-transparent grid. And then the background of the image shows a very light blue and beige. It appears maybe it's a photograph, maybe it's an abstract background. So from this, I don't know what you would think that this is, maybe a piece of abstract art. But it was an example of creative mapping for me. because the background is actually an image that was sent to me by a colleague, not a colleague, like a good friend of mine who I play Dungeons and Dragons with, who was my husband's roommate, who studies mushrooms and like looks more at parasitic fungus. And this was a microscopic image of the mycelium we'd been talking about. And I asked if he had any photos, and he sent this to me. So that's my background. The grid that's overlaid is because a lot of the work they have to do is kind of like subverting the grid or working through formal structures. And then those green tendrils, it's actually a data visualization that I created on a program called Delphi. And I exported the Teams chat that Mandy, Danny, and I had, and had my nodes and edges were chats, images shared, links shared. So I turned that into data and created this data visualization to surface those interactions and how important they were, and turn them into both a piece of art and kind of a more formally accepted data visualization. So these are the layers to my piece here, and it was meant to kind of have that root-like structure or have that natural look to it, but it's meaningful for me, and I have a copy of it printed out, and I understand what it means, and it reminds me of the important work and the relationships that went into that piece, and how important the whole process was for me. So I'd be interested to hear if anybody has also had kind of a part of your project, if it's prompted you to think about that, or if it's prompted you to think about even what do I need to work through in my process? Because for this, I didn't need to create this image as part of the article, but it was important to me to create this as a creative exercise because I was working through some identity development as I was going through the process. So it was like a different product that came out for me. So I would encourage you to reflect upon that in the time that we have left, or if there's anything that you wanted to share about my process that stood out to you, or questions that you have. I'd welcome you to spend the next 5 minutes or so. Feel free to ask me, or feel free to, if you've been inspired, to engage in your own mapping. And thank you. Danny has shared a link to the article if you're interested in reading it. It was a really, really fun and very cool project.
Jenny, I'm happy to share sort of what some of your work has inspired for me. For folks who maybe don't know, yeah, Jenny and I are colleagues. We work 3 offices apart from each other and do cool stuff together. Um, and in sort of seeing some of the stuff she's done with mapping and sort of making these relational connections on how we produce knowledge, I've been thinking about it a lot. I already have an interest in sort of like mapping methods pre this, and this gave me a new lens on it. So about a month ago, I was at a conference, and it was just like mind-blowingly great conference. And I found while I was there, I was texting like screenshot or like pictures of conference slides to various people and notes to various people. So I sat down and actually created this like map of the different topics. It was a sociology conference, so it talked about lots of different things. It talked about AI and technology, it talked about disability, which are kind of my two main scholarly areas. It talked about relational methodologies. It talked about fat studies. So I sat down and mapped out all of the little nodes of the people I kind of sent things to from this conference. And it was such a neat exercise because I think it ended up being like 7 or 8 different people on totally different topics that all got like little snippets of this conference where I was. And I thank Jenny for even making me think about that, like how so much connection was being built in this process. Um, I unfortunately don't have my notebook here where that map is. It was just like a doodle that I sketched in a conference session that wasn't as interesting as all the others. But it was just kind of a cool exercise.
Thank you so much for sharing, Danny. Yeah, it's really cool. And it makes me think too about the way information is shared and translated. So those those people that you sent things to had access to like an academic slide, but through the context and the lens and the care that you were sharing with them. And there's a care work in contextualizing information for people or taking the time to share it. Or I even think about it's related to the mushroom project too, but uh I've told my mom about it, and then she sends me articles when she sees things about, yeah, like different mushroom species or sees like things like this in the news, and it keeps extending out, and it's so unique to the relationships that you have with the people around you. And it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be an expert on a topic to share in conversation about it. And so that's kind of like the relational aspect of it that I really like. Heather, yeah.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from these examples are, for one thing, the individual work and kind of the inner work that you're doing, which is really nice, but also in connection with other people,
Hmm.
with the people that you've shared this with or the people that you've been working with. So I like both of these aspects. And in with this virtual exchange project that my partner teacher in Japan and I just finished, we're thinking through about our motivation
Hmm.
for doing this. And as part of this work, we uh, thought of 2 sets of questions with the roses, buds, and thorns
Yeah.
reflection, which is just very simple, right? The roses are the good things, thorns are the challenges, and the buds are the future potential. And so this is kind of, it was also a little bit similar. I mean, I did mine in typing, it was, written, but I could imagine, doing the same thing with images and just with pictures, with examples of notes and things. So this is a nice, thank you for, sharing these ideas and setting me in a new direction.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, it's really nice to hear that. I'm currently working on another project. I have a link to at the end just because it does kind of engage with that. But I'm doing some of this with like similar activities like that. I have one that's like rooting and branching where it's kind of like what are the tree roots. But there's the rose and thorn is a wonderful way to think about it. And I'm making like a workbook right now for graduate students and early career professionals to help them work through that identity and that reflective process. Um, Specifically looking at teaching dossiers because that is kind of one of those formal structures that is expected if you want to apply for a job or for an award or sometimes for grants. And so it helps translate how to fit your experience into those pieces and some of it how to even how to even like articulate that or question within yourself, do the work of thinking through it. So I have a link to that at the end if you're interested in being on the list for it, but it'll include more activities as well that help you work through that in ways that are meaningful to you. Because I realized that for me, visual language and design is something that makes sense to me, but written word or audio will speak to other people. And so there's no point in trying to force yourself into activities that don't offer meaning to you. All right, so welcome back to those of you who are in the breakout rooms. I'm going to just close that. We had just spoken a little bit about process here, and a project that I was working on. So now I think we'll take the last 10 minutes. Again, I had initially had this broken into kind of gallery rooms to have this conversation, but I think with us just here, what we might do is as a group, we can kind of think through these questions. I have it as a prompt card because it is an opportunity if you wanted to make a copy of this that you either write out or type out or you copy this slide somewhere else, could be an artifact of our session today. So if you wanted to reflect on something somebody has shared, you can do that with this, or I have a different one here that's kind of like something you'll carry forward from today that doesn't necessarily need to be rooted in what someone else shares, but help you reflect on today's experience. So in our last little bit here, did anyone want to share anything about the process of reflecting on mapping or the process of doing the mapping? I would welcome you to share in the chat or out loud.
I'm happy to share.
Yeah, thank you.
So it got me thinking about like the very like diverse and like diffuse like conversations and other workshops and stuff that I've gone to that have fed into my thinking. And yeah, the like network of people I can like return to as I think about how I maybe rework the workshop idea I had. So yeah, I find it really like useful for thinking about that was a first iteration of it. Now how might I go about reworking it? And for my like mapping, I got like a piece of paper.
Oh, wonderful. Very cool.
I only got as far as like writing out the like workshop kind of abstract that I'd sent to the organizers, and realizing like how far what I actually ended up doing like deviated from my initial plan, and like thinking about, okay, actually maybe my initial plan was useful and good. Maybe like how might I kind of structure this differently, and like what are the other, like I'm always so impressed when I go along to other people's workshops and they just seem to ask the right question that like gets you thinking about something in a completely, I mean, it's like all of the MYFest sessions I go to, I just including today, like just looking at something from a slant and being like, oh wow, that's that's so helpful. So yeah, like trying to work out like how is that something I emulate? How is that something and I think that uh, even though it feels effortless, like it feels, as in like my perception of it when other people do it feels like wow, that person's just a natural. Like realizing from this, like no, it's like it's a lot of hard work that goes into it. A lot of
Yeah.
like so like when you're trying to create that sense of uh I don't know, just that like aliveness in a session, that actually there's a lot of that's not just spontaneous, that has been like carefully crafted. And there are like resources and help out there, and like things to borrow from other sessions for doing this. So yeah, it even got me thinking about um like incorporating those opportunities for creativity into like I I loved like just actually getting a piece of paper and starting to like, draw stuff and get out my highlighters and stuff. And so yeah, like offering ways for people to get to be a bit more crafty, I think
Yeah,
works
and it's
well.
fun to kind of revisit some of the and like give yourself permission to do those things and to engage with it and try it out. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. But also creating the time and the space to do that. Um, Next week, Danny and I are doing another crafty session if you're looking for some time and space for that. Um, but thank you so much for sharing your experience. And hopefully this too can also give you a chance to acknowledge the things that you did well, like that you did that worked, or that you even did the session was huge, right? That you even were able to identify that like this is something I'm passionate about. This is something I want to share with others by writing that down, like you're acknowledging that you made that real and that you did that and that you showed up today and that you spoke about it and being in a place where you're able to say, hey, it didn't work out is huge because that means you're ready to learn and you're ready to rethink and ready to show up for yourself and for others. So thank you so much for sharing. I know we're ending very soon, but we have Noreen has shared any feedback. There's a link there. I have my slides here. There's a link to that OER I was talking about. Again, it's more dossiers, but if you're looking for more ways to kind of engage in these identity making exercises, it should be coming out late this fall. So I've started to make a list so that you don't forget because it doesn't become an ephemeral moment. And maybe it'll show up in your inbox later this fall. But I'll open now to if anybody has any questions or final comments or things to share. And Jenny has shared a very useful concept, just come across in her work. Yeah, that Jenny and I have done is, yeah, composting as part of knowledge practice. So thinking through activities, projects, things that didn't quite work out and figuring out how all of that work and labor can become nourishment for another thing. Yeah, and then my next blog post in that Becoming with Mushrooms series, I touch upon, yeah, fungal writing and where our initial proposal for another project, we ended up reusing that parts of it and reworking parts of it, and it became something else. So it's not always something that's lost. They're a roadmap. So from a bird's eye view, draw a roadmap of the last 3 months in our course. What were the important stops along the way? What were key intersections? What were the potholes, roadblocks, or construction zones? And what else did you encounter? I really like that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's from a video, some
Sure.
educational developers, and they have some other really nice activities. And this is a nice one that I've used with my class. But I really like yours. It really opens the door to a lot more than, a roadmap.
Thank you. And yeah, there's so many ways of approaching it. Like maybe that works for you in one context, but um, gives you a starting point for something else. It's great. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, thank you for so much for joining me today, and I wish you a wonderful, whether it's the rest of your day or your night, wherever you are. Um, and I hope that we can reconnect in future sessions, or my email is there if you ever want to reach out. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Hey, Jenny. Sorry
Thank
that I haven't been around for the 2 hours.
you.
I was having some health issues because I
Okay.
just came from the hospital. I had an appointment, so
Oh
that's why I
no.
was
Okay. So
late.
yeah. No.
Yeah.
Thank you.